were all pretty shocked at the level of destruction when they began dismantling NIOSH. We knew it was going to be not great starting in January, but I don't think we expected it to this level.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
We have Dr. Micah Niemeyer-Walsh, a researcher who is part of the firefighter health team at the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health. They are also vice president of AFGE Local 3840. Dr. Niemeyer-Walsh, welcome to the Valley Labor Report.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
I really appreciate you taking the time, and it's been a long time coming. We've had multiple conversations over the years. I think the first time that we met was at Labor Notes at a Railroad Workers Union caucus meeting.
It was, yeah.
So it's great to have you on finally. I don't know why it took this long, but we're here to celebrate some good news while tempering that with some of the ongoing bad news and some even new, more subtle bad news. But the good news is that you were laid off and now you've been rehired because of the pressure that has been put on the Trump administration because of their, absurd cutting of your jobs protecting firefighters and coal miners at NIOSH. And that was so unpopular that the Trump administration had to reverse itself. And so we want to get into that. But first, I want to kind of back up and just set the foundation again for folks and remind people about the job that you do and at NIOSH, but specifically on the firefighter team, because we haven't talked to anybody on the firefighter team yet. We've been focusing, when we've been talking about NIOSH and these cuts, we've been focusing mainly on, how this is going to be affecting coal miners. But the coal miners are not the only people that benefit from NIOSH, and there's a whole firefighter health team that you're a part of. Of course, firefighters and coal miners aren't the only people. There's lots of all workers are helped by NIOSH, but you're on the firefighter health team. Can you talk to us about the work that you do on the firefighter health team and why it's important?
Yeah, for sure. So I am part of the team that it's the National Firefighter Registry for Cancer. Which is basically a very large cohort study that aims to have a diverse range of firefighters enrolled. We collect, their health history, their work history, and the impetus for this was really that, there's a strong link between firefighting and occupational cancer. But most of the studies that have been done looking at like career and structural firefighters. So when you think of like a city firefighter, right? There's much less known about other types of firefighters, such as like wildland firefighters or volunteer firefighters, and also how race, ethnicity, and gender impact cancer. Because, really the goal was to look at why do some firefighters get cancer and others don't, and what can we do to reduce the burden of cancer in firefighters, because no one should be getting sick from their job. That's 100% preventable for every single job. And then my area of expertise, I also research firefighters' exposures during electric vehicle fires. So I would go to controlled burns of electric vehicle fires and take air samples to see what the potential exposures could be, because we actually don't know as much about that type of fire as we do other types of fires. So yeah, it's pretty important work. And we were all pretty shocked at the level of destruction when they began dismantling NIOSH. I think we knew it was going to be not great starting in January, but I don't think we expected it to this level. So yeah, just a little bit about what I do and what I do for NIOSH.
Yeah, I mean, it really was just awful, the amount of destruction that was leveled at NIOSH. I mean, something like 90% of the staff, just absolutely crazy amounts of destruction of the work that's going on there. And that's interesting about the electric vehicle fires. I worked in the energy division at the Corps of Engineers for a long time, and fires around emerging technologies is something it was one of the bigger conversations that I was having during the last year that I worked there. Fires at solar on solar arrays, fires in battery energy storage systems, and stuff like that. And so much of that is still kind of, the best practices have not been definitively developed. And you were part of the team that was trying to do that. And now you're back. But the original goal of the Trump administration would have been that work just doesn't get done because there are not very many like private actors that are doing the kind of work that you were doing, right?
Yeah, well, so we have a lot of research partners that we do this work with. But NIOSH plays a key role in getting that research done. We were funded to do more research, and that had been halted. I think it's important to note that the terminations of all of the NIOSH scientists beginning on April 1st was really kind of like the final blow that had been building up since January 21st. Starting on January 21st, we already had a complete comms blackout at all of CDC, including NIOSH. So we weren't allowed to go to conferences. We weren't allowed to give presentations. We weren't allowed to travel. And then not too long after that, they actually set all of our credit card limits to $1. So we couldn't even like buy supplies. So it's been really tough. I mean, it's been really tough to do our jobs, since January, to accomplish the mission that we've been mandated by Congress to do. And so, yeah, it's not just that we all got laid off, it's that this has been going on for months now that we haven't been able to accomplish our mission. So even though I have my job back, what I keep saying is I really wish I had my job back that I had in December.
Right. Well, and can you talk some to that about the more general implications of NIOSH, maybe pre-Trump? You've mentioned to me that NIOSH really kind of has an outsized influence, even despite its small, the small number of employees that are there. Beyond even firefighters and coal miners, can you talk to us about what that influence looks like, and if there's anything else that you haven't said about how Trump has impacted the agency's ability to wield that influence to support worker safety and health?
Yeah, so a couple of things, looking at the bigger picture of what NIOSH does, we're the only agency that conducts workplace safety and health research. So if there's a new emerging hazard, we're the only government agency looking at that. If there's a new chemical being introduced in the manufacturing process that workers may be exposed to, we're the only ones really looking at that, to what like the health impacts could be of those exposures. And the programs that were reinstated this week after, as you mentioned at the start of this conversation, people were brought back after a lot of political pressure, a lot of pressure from our supporters and organized labor. The programs that were brought back are very important. Obviously, firefighter program, very important. The coal mine, like black lung health surveillance program, very important. And the respirator certification and testing program was brought back, which is critical. However, things that weren't brought back include the folks that look at recommended exposure limits for new chemicals. So new chemical in the workplace, now there's not going to be anyone setting new recommended exposure limits for those chemicals. The toxicologists who do toxicity testing for those new chemicals, gone. And the mine safety and health program, so not just black lung, but safety issues in mines, that program wasn't brought back. And it's really important to note that the reason why NIOSH has been so effective, despite our small size, so we have approximately 1,000 employees nationwide. And again, we're the only agency that does workplace safety and health research, which impacts every single working person in this country. The reason why we've been so effective is because we are all cross-disciplinary in our research. So we rely on experts in different parts of the Institute to strengthen every single project, every single area of research that we're doing. So, for example, with my electric vehicle fire research, even though I'm in Cincinnati and I'm on the firefighter health team, I rely on the personal protective equipment researchers in Pittsburgh because one of the big concerns in the fire service is what is getting in my gear when I'm going into these electric vehicle fires is what's getting embedded in there, and when we're washing it, is it actually getting out, or am I getting re-exposed every single time I'm putting that gear back on? So we need the PPE researchers to answer that question for this project. And then we also need the toxicologists in Morgantown to do toxicity testing on the particulate that we collect from the air to see, okay, what are the actual potential health effects if you are exposed to this from these fires? So, and those toxicologists are not brought back. So right now we're missing that's like one example of a critical piece of NIOSH that we're missing. If they only reinstate the 300-ish that they've reinstated so far, NIOSH isn't going to be able to function the way that we are supposed to function as mandated by Congress in the Occupational Safety and Health Act. So there's still a lot of critical pieces that are missing. So the union's going to keep fighting until everyone gets reinstated.
Right. And so why did you want to take this job at NIOSH? What made you want to do this work?
Yeah, so I'm actually a third generation NIOSH researcher. My grandfather was a toxicologist at NIOSH for over 30 years, and he raised me. And he kind of instilled the concept of protecting workers through science research as like a value. Like it was like normal family dinner time conversation was how you can use science to protect workers. So when that's, kind of your normal everyday environment, it was only natural that that's kind of the route that I went as well. Because once you learn that that's like an option for what you can do as your career, and having a career that helps people just is something that was really important to me. Because no one really goes into workplace safety and health research for the money. But you go to school for a long time. When I went to, I got my PhD in 2020. So about 9 years, if you consider all of undergrad and graduate school to be able to do this work effectively. And I remember when I finished my PhD and I started at NIOSH, I told my friend who works at Google what my starting salary was. And her response was, didn't you go to school for like 9 years and that's all you get paid? And I was like, yeah, but I don't do it for the money, right? I probably could find a private sector job that paid more, but it wouldn't necessarily align as much with my values and what I want to be doing with my knowledge and expertise, right? So, and right now also, there's just actually not enough private sector jobs out there for people in my field. People are having to consider if they're going to change career trajectories after getting laid off because, there's just not enough out there in the private sector. What NIOSH does in many ways is inherently governmental, right? So it's tough for a lot of people, but again, I'm still hopeful that we're going to get everyone reinstated.
Yeah, and you mentioned your pay as being kind of below what one would expect, at least for the amount of kind of investment you put into your own education. Can you just make that explicit for folks? I find that that's kind of helpful for you and for the rest of your team. What is kind of the range of pay that folks are making on your team?
So when I started after finishing my PhD, I was a GS-12. And based on locality and whatnot, it was somewhere in the $70,000 range when I started. And through pay increases over time and through like performance, I'm now at roughly like 100K. But if I were to find like a private sector job, it would be probably well above that. Right. So, it's comfortable, especially in Cincinnati, where cost of living isn't, as expensive as some bigger cities. But it's not, a ton.
I mean, you're not making like, surgeon levels of money, right? Or anything like that.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
Or car dealership owner, right? And I think that the work that you do is so much more socially valuable than those folks. And last time we talked to folks at NIOSH, they mentioned that there are people on their teams that are even at like GS9 levels who had already been offered pay at a double the rate that they were being paid to do a similar job in the private sector, but they didn't want to take it because they wanted to stay at NIOSH to protect workers. And you said, and so that's kind of your experience when you talk to folks that you work at NIOSH, that you kind of feel like they could get better paying jobs, the folks on your team in the private sector.
Oh yeah, absolutely. If there's private sector jobs out there, right? That's also part of the problem. But if we were to find a job in the private sector, it would pay probably way more.
I mean, that's a good thing to point out, because it probably, unfortunately, the exact kind of job that you do, that, like you said, there's just not very many kinds of those jobs. And so what you would probably end up being hired to do would be it would probably be something like trying to cape for the company, trying to use science to try to make the case that the company is not actually hurting workers when they very clearly are, right? Those are the kinds of jobs that exist for, PhDs and like health science and stuff like that on the company side. And so that's obviously not something that folks like you would be interested in. And so, you were one of the folks who had been laid off. Can you talk to us about what that process, what did that process look like, for you and your coworkers, and how was it handled by the agency?
Yeah. So, on April 1st, almost the entire agency got some type of reduction in force notice. Some people got a notice saying you are on immediate admin leave, losing access to the system, and you're going to be terminated on June 2nd. And then some of us got letters saying you're going to be terminated on June 30th and expect 60 days notice before we terminate you. So basically, since April, everyone's kind of just been in this very tense, like, uncertainty doesn't even really do it justice for like the intensity of the emotion of what it feels like. Because you're sort of in this limbo, right? Where you're on admin leave, so you're still technically getting paid for 60 days, but also, like, are you supposed to be looking for a new job during this time, or is there a chance we're going to get brought back? And so it was tough, because on one hand, I was like, well, maybe I should be looking for a new job in case this does actually go through. But then I will feel, stressed out if I start reaching out to like my contacts looking for new positions, and then at the last minute have to say, just kidding, I got my NIOSH job back and I, would prefer to go back to that. And everyone's been in this situation, right? They're like, what do we do? Do we commit to finding something new and, kind of give up on our agency to some extent? Or do we kind of wait it out and see what happens? And me getting brought back this week is kind of a perfect example of that, right? Is that without notice, suddenly I got my job back. It was just a like 3-sentence letter from an administrator in CDC that said, you've previously received notice that you were going to be impacted by a reduction in force with a termination date at July 2nd. That is no longer true. You're no longer impacted by the RIF. Come back to work tomorrow. And so that's what we had to do. But it's tough because it was only about 300 of us with an institute of about 1,000, right? So it's bittersweet, because on one hand, like, I'm very glad I have my job back. Obviously, it's important work. On the other hand, I am devastated that my coworkers whose work is equally important, just maybe not as like spotlight, like the firefighter work, right? Because it's all of this is being made, like, these decisions are being made politically, not based in science, not based in need. It's 100% federal employees and federal scientists being used as political pawns.
Right.
And so, yeah, so it's bittersweet. I'm happy to have my job. I'm sad that my coworkers don't have their jobs back yet. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, what parts of NIOSH are not functioning now? You mentioned that something like 900 people were laid off, something like 320 have been offered their jobs back, and so that still leaves like 600 people who don't have their jobs back. What are the jobs that they were doing? I mean, the Doge argument would be that presumably these people were just kind of piddling around, not doing anything very valuable. Is that the case?
Absolutely not. Yeah, most of the people that are laid off are scientists that had very important, unique jobs, unique research areas. So right now, as I mentioned, NIOSH has a mandated mission from the 1970 Occupational Safety and Health Act to conduct risk assessment and develop recommended exposure limits to chemicals. So anytime there's a new chemical being introduced into industry, there's a whole slew of NIOSH scientists that look at that and see, what are workers' exposures, and then, do animal studies to see what are the potential health effects of those exposures, and then use all of that data to figure out, okay, if you're exposed to X amount of this chemical, you are likely to see health effects. And so therefore you want to keep exposures below that level. And as part of that, there's also ventilation engineers that research how do you control exposure to that chemical? Like, how could you design the factory to have a lower level in the air? There's also, like I mentioned, the toxicologists that do the toxicity testing, not reinstated. And what is, people don't really think about this because it's not very visible work, but it's crucial to the functioning of basically all of NIOSH. NIOSH is the only agency that does well, I shouldn't say only agency, but they do the bulk of developing analytical methods for chemicals. So that's a question about, a chemical that you don't necessarily think about, that how do you even measure how much you're being exposed to? There are chemists that need to develop methods to be able to answer that question. How do you even measure it to even know how much is in the air? And none of those people were brought back. So right now, we actually have no way to develop measurement methods for any new chemical that we need to research. So yeah, and that, those are just a few off the top of my head, but there are so many parts of NIOSH that arguably impact more workers overall than the firefighter program and the Black lung surveillance program, et cetera, that are still not reinstated. So yeah, many of NIOSH's like critical functions are still just completely dismantled at this particular moment.
Right, right. And so what about the plan that HHS released? I think it was just yesterday or the day before, that they want to fire the same number of workers from elsewhere. I mean, they're not even content to leave it at, okay, well, we are keeping 60% of the firings that we executed at NIOSH. We want to maintain that number, but we're going to, reinstate the firefighter and coal miner teams. But we're going to take some other number of 300 workers from elsewhere in the CDC. Again, like not even based on science or whatever. It's just that they want to keep that number of people off of the government workforce. And so what are you hearing about that plan, and do you have any ideas about where they're going to attack?
So we don't know where they're going to lay off the CDC employees, but they've already laid off a ton of CDC employees. So any more, the cuts have already been brutal for CDC and for NIOSH. And any more, it's just, yeah, it's going to be very detrimental to public health in this country. And it doesn't have to be that way. This isn't like a rule, like you can only have X amount of employees at CDC, right? Like this is an arbitrary thing that they are deciding. And it's also honestly a tactic to try to divide, trying to pit workers against each other. Like, oh, look, these workers got their jobs back. That means we have to let these other workers go. There's nothing we can do about it. It's just a numbers game, right? Which isn't true. It doesn't make sense to reinstate some critical functions at the detriment of other critical functions. It's like a zero-sum game that they've made up. And when we heard that, we were so angry. And so the first thing we did as the NIOSH employee unions, we connected with the CDC unions and said, hey, we need to release a joint statement speaking out against these cuts, because we need to show them that the CDC employee unions, the NIOSH employee unions are actually united, and you're not going to use this as a division tactic. It's not going to work. And we're going to make the argument for why it doesn't make sense to do this. And yeah, we released that statement yesterday because, we wanted to show like a show of strength and solidarity, and explain that this is not okay, and that everyone that is being let go is important.
Right.
We don't want to have another pandemic and be less prepared than we were last time.
You mentioned that these firings are political. Ultimately, they're not being based on science or data or fact, and that's true in a lot of ways. I've been having a lot of conversations about the cases that the unions are bringing against the government over the firings. And, people will ask me, like, okay, well, maybe it's true that the executive branch is doing this in a way that kind of violates the civil service protections and blah, 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 blah. And, but ultimately in the final analysis, doesn't the executive have the authority to fire people and lay off people? And like, ultimately, my understanding of the law is like that. Yes, I mean that there are procedures that have to be followed that are not being followed in so many instances, and so that is a way that our unions can advocate for our members who are being unlawfully fired to try to get them their jobs back. But ultimately, it does seem to me that in the final analysis, if the executive branch wants to move forward with most of the firings that they have gone through, that they have the legal authority to do that. And that's why I think that these NIOSH rehirings, making the case that they are political is, it cuts both ways, right? Like it was not a court that ordered them to give you your job back. It was the political backlash to these super, super unpopular firings. And the whole Doge project is unpopular, generally speaking. And so, I think that brings us to, I want to talk about the Federal Unionists Network and their theory of the case about how they are trying to fight not only the firings at NIOSH, but the firings everywhere and all of these negative actions that are being proposed against federal workers, because like people are constantly telling me that they feel kind of hopeless. They feel like, nothing that they do, none of the marches that they're participating in matters. None of the letters that are being sent matter. None of it matters. It's all the Republicans have the power. Trump has the power, and they're not going to bend to, protests and stuff like that. And I think that your case is a clear indication that they have and that they can. And that's kind of an illustration of the theory that the Federal Unionist Network has, which you're very involved in. And so can you talk to us about that kind of generally and how much of a role you feel like, funds actions have played in your case specifically?
Yeah, so I actually met the folks at FUN at the same Labor Notes conference where I met you. And it's been interesting to see FUN grow from just a group chat of like a couple dozen to suddenly hundreds, thousands of people, federal unionists working together to fight back against these attacks on not only federal employees, but the important services we provide. And so, what's been super helpful for me with FUN is connecting to other federal employees who are union organizers and sharing strategies of, what are we doing to fight back against these attacks? And, we think about where do federal employee unions, where do we get our power from? And a lot of it is from like our constituents, from the people that we serve, right? And so with NIOSH, we're kind of in a unique position where even though we're like a small, relatively small agency, about 1,000-ish employees, we actually have a substantial amount of power because the constituents, the people that we serve, the people that rely on the work that we do are in part organized labor. And organized labor has a lot of power. And that's both private sector and public sector unions that rely on NIOSH's work. Any person that has a job relies on NIOSH's work. And I don't know if the agency realized who they were messing with when they came after NIOSH so hard. Because, yeah, there's been a lot of union backlash here. You probably heard this week there was a big lawsuit that was dropped by Public Citizen Litigation Group with AFL and a bunch of other unions signed on to that, basically arguing like this is illegal. We rely on NIOSH services. It's enshrined in law that NIOSH has to have these functions, and you've made them not be able to function. And that hurts us. That hurts our union members. That hurts workers across the country. And so, and so you can look at that for every federal agency. And that's something that FUN is doing, right? Is we're looking strategically at, okay, how do we leverage our power as federal employees to make sure that our jobs are protected, but also that the people that we serve are protected as well. And I think what NIOSH has been doing is a really good example of that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Micah, is there anything else that we haven't touched on that you think is important that you want to leave our audience with before we let you go?
I think the key takeaway is that, NIOSH is the agency that makes sure that people don't have to choose between a paycheck and their health, that a hazard doesn't go unchecked, and that, we make sure that every single worker can go home to their family at the end of the day safe and healthy. So when you're cutting NIOSH, you're not just getting rid of a bunch of federal scientists, you were actually putting workers' lives in danger. Like, workers will die because NIOSH has been dismantled, right? That's kind of the bottom line here. Is it's life or death. It's not just some random budget cuts. This is very, very serious implications for what's happening here. We don't want to see what it looks like pre-OSH Act in today's society, right? Like, the occupational illness and injury rate before 1970 was outrageous, and our working population has doubled since then. And so, yeah, it's really scary when I think about what could happen if they're, able to actually move forward with these cuts. But I do still have a lot of hope. So, next week, actually, we're rallying in DC outside of Department of Health and Human Services headquarters with National AFL and some of our other union supporters, because apparently RFK can't hear us from Cincinnati. So we're going to go outside his office and yell at him from there to say, you are putting workers' lives in danger, and NIOSH employees and the working people who we serve are not okay with that. And we're going to fight back as hard as we can to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Dr. Micah Niemeyer Walsh, appreciate your time. Dr. Niemeyer Walsh is a part of the firefighter health team at NIOSH and vice president of the American Federation of Government Employees, AFGE Local 3840. They have not been speaking on behalf of the agency during this conversation. We really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. Solidarity.
Absolutely. You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.